Janambati nansule Itaire Vitarata wanduo Tenataura nansule Faizirene Nuambi nimbule Undulu nasule Unwambi nimbule Ireu Ulu nasule Faizirene Nuambi nimbule Rais Nusule walue Inize Numa fatabue Mraize Nusula wakatke Inize Nute nasuantke Unyulu nasule Unwambi nimbule Ire Ulu nasule Faizirene Nuambi nimbule Aizi Nusula watapne Awindinde Numbisi ni patne Raize Nusula taterake Tisukati ni reu Ulu narerake Ulu nasule Unwambi nimbule Ireu Ulu nasule Faizirene Wambi nimbule Undulu nasule Unwambi nimbule Ireu Ulu nasule Faizirene Nuambi nimbule Undulu nasule Unwambi nimbule Ireu Ulu nasule Faizirene Wambi nimbule
Ikana juya ijerela Irise kafra finyela Idise kawata fe Watititabi abato Irise kitolo malo Ikana fo Kwikelele Aluila sila lombe Ombe dise kola Dunyaro Ikana nyina Isa Isa Telemina ikana makololike buto ikana makololike buto ala ife ala ife kamoya
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to start shortly. We're just waiting for our keynote speaker. She's on her way. She's running a little bit late, but we'll begin shortly. In the next 2 to 3 minutes, we'll be starting. Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning and bearing with us for starting a little bit late. I don't have the difficult task of welcoming everyone this morning, fortunately. We have our Chief Executive, Mr. Silo Hatang, who give a welcome to everyone and just speak a bit about the significance of this work to the Nelson Mandela Foundation and why we've embarked on this process of focusing on bridging the gap between employment, education, and labor, with a particular focus on young people with disabilities. As we know, it's a demographic that is constantly being ignored in conversation in our country, and we thought it's a perfect moment for us as the foundation to spotlight them. But I'll hand over to our Chief Executive, Mr. Hatang.
Thank you very much, Q. This is the problem when you've got a tall guy who's doing you have to move the furniture, so yeah. Good morning, everybody. So good to see some familiar faces in the auditorium. Thank you very much. Yes, good to see you. No, thank you for making the time today. I was about to insist that you greet back, but then I realized you started late. So I don't want Q to then start saying, we gave you 2 minutes, you took 5. So thank you so much for coming through. Let me start off by thanking our partners, the NYDA and Hanns Seidel Foundation. Hanns Seidel Foundation ke Moreki today. So you thank Moreki first, and then you can then ensure that they can reka again. Being Germans, Hans didn't hear a word, and I'll explain later what Moreki means. It means you are the most important. Thanks. Thank you very much, Hans. And to the team of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, thank you very much. I know the last few weeks they've been hard at it to make sure that this is a success. In 2021, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, in partnership with the Hanns Seidel Foundation, launched its Dialogue and Advocacy Fellowship, an annual program aimed at investigating how patterns of intergenerational poverty can be systematically tackled in South Africa. For this year, the fellowships is centered around the theme of bridging the gap between education and labor, with a particular focus on young persons with disabilities, a demographic that is often left out in discourse around the gainful employment in South Africa. The timing of this year's theme could not be more relevant as South Africa continues to feel the wrath of its unemployment crisis. The majority of working-age South Africans remain confined to the sidelines of economic participation, rendering the pursuit of economic autonomy and the actualization of human dignity into the mere pipe dream rather, for them. I think the emphasis of this D word, dignity, will feature over and over as we go through today. The crisis disproportionately impacts our young people, reflected by the fact that our levels of youth unemployment continues to rank as the highest in the world. At present, 63.9% of our young people aged between 15 and 24 are unemployed. I want that number to stay with you. 63.9% of our young people aged between 15 and 24 are unemployed. This is almost twice the national unemployment rate of 34.5% and more than 4 times the global average of 13.6%. Nearly 2/3 of South Africa's youth are denied their right to work, to pursue economic freedom. It is well understood that not all young graduates enjoy equitable access to formal sector work opportunities, with young people from historically disadvantaged communities experiencing a suppressed concept of choice and limited connections to the labor market. Within this subset are young people with disabilities who face even greater levels of marginalization, and who are often left out of the discourse completely. It's like you are forgotten. Not only did democracy leave you behind, but we continue to forget about you as we deal with these issues. The stigma and misconceptions associated with disability continue to result in persons living with disabilities being systematically denied their right to actively participate in all facets of society. As a result, they have limited access to education, and their opportunities to enter and thrive in the labor market are restricted. While it is estimated that South Africa has a disability prevalence of 7.5%, persons with disabilities only account for 1% of the national workforce. Though there is consensus that interventions aimed at addressing the unemployment crisis should be premised on ideals of transformation, persons with disabilities remain relegated to a footnote of the topical discourse. While South African legislation relating to disability inclusion is considered progressive, an emphasis on compliance and accommodation does little to tackle the attitudinal barriers that continue to prevent the meaningful inclusion of persons with disabilities into the labor force. I think this is very important. If we are to do anything about this, we need to begin to be asking ourselves, it can't just stay in policies. We must do better in terms of ensuring that we implement better than we do at the moment. The public sector itself is even failing to adhere to its own mandated quota of 2% in its hiring of persons with disabilities. It is becoming clear with each passing day that the time to contend with the extent to which we flout our principles of diversity has come. We need to be more intentional about cultivating a society whereby stigma and misconception do not place a limit on anyone seeking and attaining gainful employment, particularly for persons with disability. It is for this reason that the Nelson Mandela Foundation has chosen to partner with the NYDA to convene this critical dialogue on a topic that is too often sidelined in the general youth unemployment discourse. I just realized I used the 12th official language by using NYDA, the National Youth Development Agency. I know that we use abbreviations as given. This dialogue is aimed at bringing together various stakeholders from different sectors to share their varied insights into the challenges that prevent persons with disabilities from gaining equitable and meaningful access to the world of work. It is our hope that we as a South African collective can together innovate solutions towards the dismantling of both attitudinal and physical barriers that continue to see persons with disabilities stigmatized and denied their right to meaningfully participate in the South African labor force. I forgot to mention that we have in our midst also the Commissioner, Commissioner Malachi. Thank you so much for joining us here, Commissioner from the South African Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe I should close with a quote from Madiba. It is not he says, I quote, he says, it is not a question of patronizing philanthropy towards disabled people. They do not need the patronage of from the non-disabled, rather. It is not for them to adapt to the dominant and the dominating world of the so-called non-disabled. It is for us to adapt our understanding of common humanity, to learn of the richness of how human life is diverse, to recognize the presence of disability in our midst and as an enrichment of our diversity. Close quotes. We are richer and stronger by being more inclusive. We should be a nation that goes out of its way to ensure that those who feel that democracy continues to leave them behind, that they feel included. The discarded, the forgotten, those that we think should always be at the center, yet we put them in the periphery. We can build a nation that's more stronger by being intentional in our actions of pulling together a nation that says the vulnerable are part of us, because we could be the vulnerable tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Mr. Atang. I think I have to arrange the furniture as well after you've spoken. I think you mentioned critical points in your warm welcome message to say we need to start reflecting on the attitudinal barriers and start mainstreaming this topic and ensure that it doesn't just become a matter of compliance from a policy level, but it becomes embedded in our processes as a country holistically and in the work that we do. I think you've done a very great job of welcoming us here. If it was not as cold as it is, we'd take off our jackets to show just how welcome we are, but we'll reserve that act for later when the weather is now warmer. Just to run through today's program, we have a very, not so long, not so short program, but I think it's a program that's reflective of the importance of the topic we have today. We're hoping we'll be able to finish on time. But as we've seen with conversations of this nature that are quite important, sometimes we do tend to run a little bit late, so apologies for that in advance. To move on to the next session now of our program, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, who comes from the National Youth Development Agency. And I think which agency better than an agency that deals with youth and is an arm of government to reflect on this issue and to co-create solutions with us all in the room as we move forward. Ms. Asanda Luwaca began activism while pursuing a qualification where she participated in the life of youth organizations. She later continued with her activism in the political space where she served across various leadership structures. She completed a BA in politics qualification in 2012 and later pursued her honors in politics. Over the years, she has obtained additional qualifications, which are the following: Certificate in Evidence-Based Policy Making and Implementation at the Nelson School of Government at the University of Cape Town. Certificate in Policy Research Training at the University of Stellenbosch, and Certificate in Academic Writing Skills also at the University of Stellenbosch. Her activism in politics saw her participating in the 2015 Fees Must Fall movement, where she later contributed a chapter in a published book titled We Are No Longer at Ease, The Struggle for Fees Must Fall. She later relocated to Cape Town to join the ANC Parliamentary Caucus, where she worked as a researcher. Some of her achievements include her being one of the winners of the International Organization for Migration competition, where she, alongside Progressive Youth in South Africa, were awarded an all-expenses-paid educational trip to the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. She was also a finalist for the Moremi Initiative Women's Leadership in Africa 2015 Fellows Program. In 2021, she was appointed by His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa to serve as the Executive Chairperson of the Board of Directors at the NYDA, where she is currently serving. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Asanda Luwaca.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm welcome and greetings to everyone present. And allow me to say all protocol observed. I think I'm quite excited to be part of this event this morning, precisely because it comes at such an opportune time when, at the level of the NYDA, we would have recently established and adopted a strategy that brings forth and ensures that persons living with disabilities become part and parcel of society. But before I get into the meat of my input this morning, I think it's important really, excuse me, when we are precisely looking and speaking on this topic, that we begin with just understanding the context to which brings us here this morning. And firstly, I think it's just important to highlight that, you know, the reality that we are faced with is that persons living with disabilities constitute, you know, the world's largest minority, and they continue to experience barriers insofar as their meaningful participation in all aspects of life, including the economy. Now, these barriers take on various shapes and forms, including those relating to the physical environment, as well as, you know, to areas that relate to information and communication technology, or those resulting from legislation or policy, or rather from a societal attitude and discrimination. Now, the result is that persons living with disability do not have equal access to socioeconomic rights and services, including education, including employment, healthcare, and the likes. So the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities uses an encompassing definition of persons with, living with disabilities, and it includes the following, and I quote, "Those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others." Now, youth, particularly living with disabilities, are an integral part of the South African society. Therefore, you know, youth programs ought to seek to speak to their needs to correctly fulfill the principle of economic justice when dealing with opportunities that are intended to benefit young people across South Africa. Now, at the level of the NYDA, it is critical for us as an agency and an arm of government to create an enabling environment that will pursue reasonable accommodation for youth living with disabilities. Now, What we must then begin to do is ensuring that at the level of the NYDA, we must initiate catalytic programs that are designed to benefit youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, when we looked at how do we then ensure that that particular cohort of young people become part and parcel of society, we had then devised a strategy that will implement and ensure that the workings of the NYDA inculcate and infuse persons living with disabilities. And the main objectives of the strategy that was devised was to create an enabling environment that will promote the full participation of youth living with disabilities across the products and services that we make available. Also, to develop proper mechanism as well as capacities that will facilitate the integration of youth living with disabilities, as well as to identify and eliminate barriers to participation and development in economic opportunities. And lastly, to establish and maintain partnerships with relevant internal as well as external stakeholders. Now, excuse me, when we look at the strategy itself, in the main, the strategy looks towards developing programs that will be implemented in the current financial year, as well as to assisting in building awareness amongst young people, as particularly those living with disabilities, and link them to the various products and services that we make available. Now, when we looked at the distribution of persons with disabilities, and I had prepared a presentation, but nonetheless, what we then found was that when we looked at the different cohorts of the different age groups, you found that the largest age group of persons living with disabilities is the 75 plus people within the age of 75 years and above. And when we look at particularly the youth component, because that's the component that we focus as an agency, and that is the age group between 15 and 34, was that there's a small margin of the individuals living with disability. However, however small or large that they are, does not necessarily mean that they should then be relegated insofar as the participation, not just in the economy, but across all sectors of society. Now, in the main, I guess the strategy really seeks to address fundamental and key aspects, insofar as the integration of persons living with disability. And one of those objectives is really to ensure that, the integration of persons with disability becomes part and parcel of our programs. We've got various components such as, ensuring that our website is disability friendly, ensuring that we're able to effectively define and define the current employment equity so that we have full representation of persons living with disability, as well as achieving the targets that would have been set out by your various instruments, be it policy at a governmental level and so on. So I will just briefly jump to the last slide, which then just briefly reflects on the progress that we've done before concluding this morning. Now, insofar as the progress that we've done with, the work that we've done as it relates to this particular strategy, we have been able to establish partnerships with, key institutions such as, your South African blind youth organizations, and, us at the level of the agency to be part of this program this morning further speaks to, the idea of building on from those strategic partnerships. But we've also been able to, or rather the objectives of this, the establishment of partnerships with your South African Blind Youth Association organization, was to provide an overview of SAIBO's mission and goals, to also ensure that where our mandate stops, we are able then to leverage off other organizations so that we are able to make a far greater impact than what we would have seen without us having built those strategic partnerships. But I think in conclusion, what I want to emphasize is that, the idea that persons with disabilities will continue to be a priority at the level of the agency. And because one of our core mandates is to ensure that our core activities is to form a lobby and advocacy group, we need to get to a point where the work or us recognizing persons living with disability does not just end at the level of the agency, but we're able to then lobby your various government departments, lobby private sector, lobby civic society, stakeholders and the likes, so that we don't just relegate us including persons living with disability as a box ticking exercise for the sake of malicious compliance or for the benefit of us reaching certain targets, but it needs to be part and parcel of the work that is done at the level of government, at the level of private sector and the likes. But two, I think it becomes also important, and what we would have stated earlier on, was the need for us to forge strategic partnerships so that the work is able to continue forward. And emphasizing this, the President in his State of the Nation address earlier on this year would have spoken about the need of building social compacts. And the idea here is that we need to get to a point where we bring everyone on board, government, private partners, civic society and the likes, so that we take that collective responsibility and not relegate it to a certain government department or a certain organization or certain individuals, but we collectively take it upon ourselves to ensure that those persons living with disabilities do not become left on the periphery as it relates to society and economic participation. But equally, I think what's important is that we need to continue with these conversations, and we need to also get to a point where we educate one another and we educate society about, what are the lived realities or the lived experiences that persons living with disabilities encounter on a daily. But this, and I think the earlier speaker would have spoken about the need for us to break down, attitudinal barriers, so that, and I guess linked to that is the need for us educating. Because when we are educated around, what are the challenges that they are faced with, those attitudinal barriers begin to break down. But I think lastly, and this is also what the previous speaker would have spoken about, was the idea of intentionality, and that we need to be intentional about ensuring people living with disabilities form part and parcel of, the work that is done at a government level, at a private sector level, at an individualistic level, community-based level, and that we don't just relegate the inclusion of persons living with disability to a select organization, select department and the likes. But with those words, I think mine is really just to thank the organization or the foundation for initiating such discussions, and for recognizing the NYDA as a key and a strategic partner to continue on the work in ensuring that persons living with disabilities find expression in, the various instruments, the programs, not just at government, but at a private sector level and the likes. So with those words, I want to extend my deep appreciation to the organizers, the foundation, and to yourselves for affording me this platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Executive Chairperson of the NYDA. I think she's touched on some key lines of inquiry around how people with disabilities are one of the world's biggest minorities, and it is our duty as the public to educate one another and to ensure that we mainstream issues related to people with disabilities, and actually also do the practical work. It's not enough to just talk about these issues and engage in conversation. We need to do the practical work to ensure that we foster inclusion. And speaking of the practical work, so one of the things the foundation has done, I think the foundation is one of the few, if not only, memory institutions that uses Braille in our exhibitions. So we're welcome to go take a stroll through our exhibition after this dialogue and see what we have. We have some of the most interesting artifacts on Madiba's life, and also some of the most interesting artifacts on the history of our country in general. We are now going to move to the core of today's business, to reflect and to talk about some of the work that has taken place in the sector and in various other sectors, and what other people are doing to foreground issues of people with disabilities. I think the NYDA has spoken of the work on a policy level and what it is that they're trying to do. And we have an interesting panel of diverse people who've been engaged in this kind of work for many years. We are very fortunate to have them join us today and come present. To handle the next part of our program, which is the facilitated panel discussion with our panel, is Ms. Diana Msipa. I'm going to try to briefly introduce her. She has quite a long CV, but I'll try stick to the most important parts, which is all of it, so you'll bear with me. Ms. Msipa is the manager for the Disability Rights Unit at the Center for Human Rights, Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria. Her expertise is in the field of international human rights law, with a particular focus on disability rights law and policy. A former criminal prosecutor, Diana has a keen interest in the intersection between international human rights law and criminal justice. She's an author with various academic publications in the areas of access to justice, legal capacity, reasonable accommodation, employment, and disability justice. Diana is also an assistant editor of the African Disability Rights Yearbook, an academic journal that focuses on African scholarship on disability rights. She holds a Master's of Law LLM degree from McGill University in Canada, a postgraduate diploma in legal practice from Northumbria University in the United Kingdom, and a Bachelor of Laws degree from Newcastle University in the United Kingdom. She's currently completing a Doctor of Laws degree at the Center for Human Rights, Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. I think you'll all agree with me that we're in very good hands today. I'd like to call upon the stage Ms. Msipa to begin our next session.
Thank you. Very good morning to everyone. So my role this morning is very simple. It is just to introduce to you our various panelists that will be speaking to us this morning. So I know we're running behind time, so I won't waste much time. I'll jump straight into our core business today. So it is my pleasure to invite our very first speaker this morning, Dr. Armand Bam. I asked him this morning how to pronounce his name, and I hope I've done justice to it. So Dr. Bam will be presenting on gaps in practice and why businesses and organizations need to make improved efforts at inclusion through providing practical insights before performance. So Armand Bam received a PhD in business administration from the University of Cape Town and is currently the head of social impact and the Small Business Academy at Stellenbosch Business School and senior lecturer in business and society. Armand is responsible for leading the business and school's social impact philosophy and strategy and oversees the execution of SI processes, programs, and projects. He lectures on the role of the business and society in MBA and MPhil Future Studies programs and disability inclusion and quality and integrity in the PG, postgraduate diploma rather, in leadership program. His research interests include disability, diversity, equity and inclusion, non-profit management and leadership and social impact education. As the lead author in his work on student reflections titled Transformative Learning Through Social Engagement, Reflections on Responsible Leadership Development in Management Education, received the Best Paper Award at the International Business Conference in 2019. Dr. Bam, welcome. I'll give the floor to you. You have 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, colleagues. It's my pleasure to be here. First and foremost, I think I'm an activist. I happen to be an academic. It's always wonderful to hear what it is one has achieved on the journey, but I'm here to speak about something really important. And so my opening statement is this. People with disabilities, and particularly the youth, have the skills. They have the qualifications. They also have the support of national, regional and international legislation providing frameworks and guidelines for promoting their employment. Yet results have failed to live up to the expectations and needs of the disabled community. If we look globally, we understand that people with disability, and it's been mentioned, form the largest minority group. But I want to take that one step further and suggest to you that it's the only minority group that anyone in this room may enter into unwillingly. 80% of people with disabilities live in developing countries. 20% of the world's poorest people have some disability. There we go. The slides are visible. We can move on to the second slide. Do I have the clicker? Yes, I do. Wonderful. Aha. Women with disabilities experiencing exclusion on account of their gender and their disability. I think that's an important notion for the Youth Development Agency to pick up in terms of that intersectionality. Significantly, when we consider the protections afforded to people with disabilities, comparative studies on disability legislation shows that only 45 countries have anti-discrimination and anti-disability specific laws, and that's a total of over 150 countries in the world. When we look more closely at employment, 386 million people of the working age population have a disability. 80% of people with disabilities still remain unemployed globally. And as mentioned earlier, when we look at the South African context, less than 2% of our labor force are represented by people with disabilities at the most important intersections of management. So I'm here today to speak to employers, to the workforce. And what is it that we should consider as employers? And I want to leave these 4 things, first of all. At the heart of any human-centered organization, and that's typically what businesses claim these days, to be human-centered organizations, is and should be an all-embracing community. One where humanity and compassion, first and foremost, fosters inclusion and diversity. Secondly, businesses should consider that who we are as people, our identities, gain meaning within communities. And for most people, this is achieved through work. Thirdly, the inclusion of minority groups in workplaces can benefit organizations. It's well documented, economically, legally, and socially, when we look at addressing gender, ethnicity, and also functional ability. And in South Africa, particularly, those intersectionalities come into play when we look at how people with disabilities are employed. And fourth, we've all will probably say this, that legislation has a vital role in eliminating unfair employment practices. But an over-reliance on it can negate the benefits of more holistic practices. And it's the push to more holistic practices that I want to encourage businesses to take. The declining numbers of people with disabilities in meaningful employment has been an indication that this approach, relying on legislation, has failed. And so when we look closer at the South African landscape, I suggest 3 Ps for business. Firstly, they need to perceive what is happening within their organizations. Getting people with disabilities into employment has become one of the hotter social impact topics on the agendas of government and corporations alike in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite these laws and legislations and guidelines, the results of corporate initiatives for inclusivity have failed to reach the expectations and needs of the disabled community, as unemployment continues to rise with this minoritized group. Companies must rethink their definition of inclusion in terms of working experiences and the integration rather than the numbers and the ticks in compliance with the law. It is essential to go into the fine grain of the matter. Those who lead organizations have to go into their workplaces. They have to consult with the people most affected in order to understand the challenges people with disabilities face. In a recent study we completed looking at the work experiences of people with disabilities, we found a number of areas of concern. The induction process is of key importance to people with disabilities. And this initial induction experiences invariably leave a lasting positive or negative impression on people with disabilities. And so people with disabilities, their levels of satisfaction and comfort rose when there are information sessions and induction workshops, which are less formal. So the typical formal sensitization programs don't result in what they should. Secondly, what we found is these generic programs are ineffective, largely because they don't consult people with disabilities. A third aspect was the disclosure. And I think when we look at disclosure, how that happens, the need for control, the autonomy to disclose, and not only for people with disabilities in the definitions that we use today, it's expanding to include people with diabetes, other autoimmune disorders. How people have control over the ability to disclose is key in terms of what businesses need to pay attention to. And then wanting to be accepted by managers and co-workers remains a key criteria for people with disabilities. What I suggest business should do in terms of projecting, I call this an opportunity for food for thought. It's where they should be asking simple questions of themselves. How easy is it for a new employee with a disability to integrate into our organizations and the office? To what extent does our organization make its physical and also now, more so, the virtual workplace accessible before a person with disability arrives at the office? How could your organization change the structure and design of workplaces to make it more accessible? And thirdly, another question for me, and just due to time, I'll cut this short. How would you define disability-inclusive workplaces? When you discuss disability and inclusion in yourselves, what themes arise? Do you talk about the topic frequently? And I'm so glad to be here because part of my role as an ally within the sector is to take the conversation to different places. I think I've, over the 20 years in disability, tried to stay clear of the talk shops amongst each other, and hence the work within a business school is quite important. The last bit, in terms of not only projecting and having food for thought, is to perform. Businesses need to act. And so overwhelmingly, there's calls for business to readjust the values, their attitudes, and norms within the organization to align with a commitment, and this is key, a commitment to offer an inclusive environment for people with disabilities. Companies, leaders in those organizations need to assess their policies, their procedures, and the rules that encourage or discourage, and I think that's critical. We often set up our workplaces with unintended consequences that leads to the discouragement in terms of attitudes towards people with disabilities. Third, we need to ensure that organizations set up effective processes for hiring, the placement, and retaining. This is key. The retention of people with disabilities, we need to do more with. And if you look in terms of the upstream, identifying the turnover rates with employees with disability and regularly measuring the variances in this rate as your inclusivity policy is rolled out, implemented, and gains in maturity. And so from my side, it's a notion that these policies should continually be developed to ensure the most inclusive environment. We need to instill a corporate mindset that views every employer as having unique needs and implement a safe speaking space. I think we often don't have that. Fifth point for me is give specific focus on the role of the manager and the positive effect of people with disabilities as team members in the workplace. And as I wrap up, I think it is important that we encourage managers to engage early on with people with disabilities and understand their needs before arrival. There's not enough work that's done before people arrive within the workplace. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baum, for that. You came in at 9 minutes and 49 seconds, so thank you for keeping to time. And I thought your presentation was also very insightful. 3 important takeaways for me, that inclusion is not, business should not really just be about the bottom line, but it's important for businesses to be human-centered. It's important for businesses to take into account the fact that our identities or gain meaning within communities. Within African philosophy, we have the concept of Ubuntu, which is about living in community, us existing in community, and that should be encompassed within a business framework. And also that inclusion can benefit organizations. So although the bottom line should not be the only consideration that businesses make, but that inclusion also does benefit organizations as well. And then second important takeaway is that instead of thinking about inclusion in terms of numbers or in terms of quotas, like how many persons with disabilities have we put in our organization, but think of it in terms of how meaningful is our inclusion. To what extent are we involving or consulting with persons with disabilities within the context of the employment environment? Are there induction programs, for example, that would enable someone with an employee with a disability to effectively and easily transition into the work environment, and to reflect on issues as well of accessibility and what changes the organization needs to make, which leads to the third and last practical point about the need for a practical approach to inclusion. It's more than just having policies, but implementing them. So thank you for that very insightful presentation. The second presentation that we will have is by Commissioner Bokankatla Joseph Malachi, and he will be presenting on the foremost barriers to meaningful labor force participation faced by persons with disabilities, and how employers can strive towards integrating persons with disabilities into the workplace. So just to briefly introduce Commissioner Malachi to all of us, Advocate Bokankatla Joseph Malachi is a full-time commissioner at the South African Human Rights Commission who is passionate about the promotion and the protection of the rights of people with disabilities. Notably, he made history by being the first black blind student to be admitted at the University of the North in 1971, as well as the first black blind person to be admitted as an advocate of the Supreme Court of South Africa in 1977. He has more than 2 decades experience working in the public sector. He started his legal career as a legal advisor in the Department of Justice from 1977 until 1995, after which he served as the head of provincial legal services for South African Police Services in Limpopo Province from 1995 to 2001. He also served as a member of the school governing body for Silo School for the Blind from 2001 to 2007. During his first 7-year term as a commissioner of the South African Human Rights Commission, he was very active in the field of disability rights, having played a pivotal role in the development of the White Paper on the Rights of People with Disabilities. In 2014, Advocate Malachi was invited to be part of the UN Working Group on the Promotion of the Rights of People with Disabilities, UNPRPD. He has been a member of the Disabled People South Africa, DPSA, since 1991. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Commissioner Malachi.
Thank you, Program Director. I just hope that I'll be able to perhaps break the record that Dr. Bam has made in talking within 9 minutes. So, greetings to members of the audience and to my fellow panelists. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate in this very important conversation. And why I'm delighted is because I've, at one or the other stage of my life, have been a young disabled person and who was looking for employment. And then that's why this topic is so close to my heart, because I know of the difficulties that were there that I have personally experienced as a young man from the university and to get work in the public sector. So I just hope that with conferences like this, which the Nelson Mandela Foundation has organized, that this will help that the young disabled persons of today do not experience the same difficulties and hardships which some of us have experienced in the past. In terms of Article 24 and 27 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which South Africa ratified in 27 and is therefore bound by it, South Africa is obliged to provide inclusive education and afford persons with disability employment opportunities on an equal basis with others. The work of the Commissioner of South African Human Rights Commission for Children's Rights, the Commissioner for Education, and myself, the Commissioner for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, respectively and collaboratively seeks to realize these obligations. Education plays a central role in providing development opportunities for persons with disabilities across the world. It forms the primary means by which persons with disabilities can lift themselves out of poverty and safeguarded from exploitation and exclusion. Similarly, persons with disabilities can make up a significant portion of South Africa's productive workforce if barriers preventing them from actively participating in employment are identified and removed. However, despite progressive legislation, including the Employment Equity Act, PEPUDA, and the Bill of Rights, young persons with disabilities in South Africa still face significant challenges in accessing basic education. Young persons with disabilities have less access to education at any level compared to their peers without disabilities, and that exclusion based on disability is higher than exclusion on any other basis, such as gender, race, and socio-economic circumstances. And their education remains largely segregated from so-called mainstream education. South Africa's education system also remains largely segregated, and learners with disabilities are derogated to special needs schools and excluded from mainstream education. Currently, less than 4% of all schools are full service schools, the so-called full service schools, meaning schools that cater to learners with and without disabilities, and a majority of them are not functioning as they should. This means that most learners with disabilities must attend special needs schools, as they are often not admitted at the so-called mainstream schools. However, there is a shortage of such schools in the first place. They are underfunded, and many have inadequately trained support staff, and therefore pose a security risk to learners and provide subpar education. As a result, many youth with disabilities are excluded from the education system, and the privileged few who receive basic education are not adequately prepared or empowered to enter the labor force. Another issue with segregated education system is that it creates and reinforces the idea that persons with disabilities are to be excluded from society and treated differently. This creates a stigma around disability, which has severe social consequences that translate into unaccommodating workplaces, environments, because many employers and fellow employees will often only engage and interact with a person with disability for the first time as an adult in the workplace. This results in postponing the potential for disability to be a mainstream and integrated component of the diversity in our respective communities. We witness the casual exclusion of persons with disability in society in regular daily activities such as lack of accommodating transport, special need housing, or public building facilities. When disability is but an add-on afterthought, this has negative practical implications such as workplace environments not having accommodating facilities, the requisite software, that is technology, or appropriately skilled staff members to accommodate persons with disabilities. This adds an additional layer of difficulty for employees with disabilities and further alienates them. Therefore, it is not the competence of persons with disability that makes them inefficient in most workplaces. Neither is it their disabilities. Rather, it is our society's structural and institutional exclusion of persons with disability that inhibit them, even the most appropriately qualified and trained persons with disability, from efficient in most workplaces. In addressing some of these challenges, the South African Human Rights Commission has established a dedicated children's rights unit within the Commission to ensure that children's rights are always prioritized. Within this unit, a memorandum of understanding with UNICEF to enable a coordinated strategic movement to promote children's rights was signed, and a multi-sectoral think tank committee was established. Other achievements of the unit include successfully hosting a multi-stakeholder conference aimed at ensuring an inclusive environment for children with disabilities, including access to education through legislative review. The Commission, after rigorous and extensive stakeholder consultation and internal research, has also made submissions to Parliament regarding amendments to the South African Schools Act and the Employment of Educators Act. The proposed amendments are intended to align the respective pieces of legislation with improved access to education in order to give effect to the realization of the right to basic education for all, including children with disabilities. In an attempt to mainstream disability in the workplace, my office has developed and launched a disability and employment toolkit, and monitoring framework for employers in the private sector to try to assist employers in the private sector be more accommodating and inclusive in their work environments and practices. Recently, I've had, or for the past 4 years, I've had the honor of being a panel judge in the Business Engage Mainstreaming Gender and Disability competition, where top corporate companies showcase the ways in which they have made their respective workplaces more inclusive and accommodating for marginalized persons, including persons with disabilities. The top 4 companies were, and I'm not very sure whether I must mention this name. Must I mention them? Okay, no, thank you. There's KPMG, Vodacom, Cummins, and British American Tobacco. Unfortunately, the practices in these companies are the exceptions and not the norm. And I encourage all employers with ambitions to create inclusive workplaces to learn from these companies. However, as the Commission, we are painfully aware that even if workplaces allowed young persons with disabilities to thrive, many will not get this opportunity because of the segregated education system provides the first barrier of entry into the labor force. This is why the Commissioner for Children's Rights, Education, and Persons with Disabilities are collectively championing the movement for the implementation of a regulatory framework for inclusive education in South Africa. This tripartite collaboration has established what we call a Section 11 committee to establish a national advocacy program that prioritizes the positioning of inclusive education within the Department of Education. The committee comprises the commissioners for all 3 units which I've mentioned, as well as civil society experts and advocates in the sphere of inclusive education. The committee advocates for, 1, the enactment of appropriate legislative measures for the establishment of inclusive education in line with the Convention on the Rights of People with Other, the Convention of, yes, thank you. Now I'm convinced that you are following me up. Yeah.
Would you mind wrapping up a little bit?
Okay, thank you. 2, the support of special schools and the special schools resource centers. 3, abandonment of the term full service schools in favor of all ordinary schools. 4, skills development for inclusive teaching and learning to be prioritized. So I said I wanted to break the record, but it seems I'm not going to be able to. But what I've got to say is that in conclusion, okay, the rest of my address, I think, will be made available to you by the foundation. So, but what I can say is that we are aware of the legislation and policy development that they are not enough to improve representation and integration of persons with disabilities in societies, schools, and the workplace, as they are unlikely to drive enough real change on the ground and challenge social norms. So let me go to the end. What do we want to do as a commission? So the commission, in order to bridge the gap between education and labor for young persons with disabilities, will at all times engage with society and with the NYDA. The structures are there. The legislation is there. What is missing is proactive, coordinated movement to effect the requisite changes. This is the role that the Commission, in its capacity as an independent monitoring mechanism, seeks to play. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Malachi, for that wonderful and insightful presentation. I felt like such an evil person having to ask him to conclude. But I do know that he's brought up some very pertinent, very important issues that I'm sure we want to explore a little bit further. And though I've cut him short a little bit, please know we do have a session where we will have a dialogue. So if you want to engage further with Commissioner Malachi and any of the other presenters, please, we can use that time to do that. Once again, thank you, Commissioner Malachi. If I can just let everyone know that we have a slight change to the program in terms of the order of the speakers. We will first have Ms. Lydia Pretorius come up and present as we get our other two panelists are online, and there's just a few technical glitches that are being sorted out. So I'll introduce Ms. Pretorius to speak first, and Ms. Pretorius, will speak on the need and mechanisms for building allyship that recognizes persons with disabilities as assets in society and the workplace. So Ms. Lydia Pretorius is an independent disability inclusion consultant and activist. She is a serial social justice and disability rights activist who has worked in rural development, disability inclusion, and public policy making for 30 years. Her life experience transcended working in frontline service delivery as a social justice activist, a full-time politician as deputy executive mayor, a public policy maker, a rural development practitioner, and a foster mom. Highlights of her extensive career include supporting the establishment of the disability program in the presidency in 2015, as well as participatory drafting of the Disability Rights Charter in 1992, the White Paper on Integrated National Disability Strategy in 1996 through to 1997, the Promotion of the Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act in 1998 through to 1999, and the White Paper on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2015 to 2016. In 2015, rather, not 2015. That's really odd. In 2015 through to 2016. She has been working as an independent consultant since February 2020, focusing on facilitating implementation of the policy frameworks advocating for the rights and equitable inclusion of persons with disabilities at community and institutional level towards changing the lives of children and adults with disabilities and their families in more meaningful and sustainable ways. She's a qualified coach focusing on disability empowerment in life coaching. Please help me welcome Ms. Lydia Pretorius.
You. Okay, let's see if I could get the technical guys to. Okay. All right, it's going. Good morning, everybody. My first observation when the second speaker came up was that I'm sure nobody ever had to ask for an adjustable microphone stand. Nobody had to beg for it as a reasonable accommodation. I'm also sure it was designed in the era when men were the only speakers. So it was not necessary to ask for. I'm going to try and bring the conversation back to us and not to them. Because I think that's often where we miss the point. We make the conversation about them and not us. And that's why I decided to speak around accountable and action-oriented allyship. And I was very much part of the them sort of agenda. And after leaving government and really starting to say, what are we doing wrong? Because I think we all know that if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we will not get different results. Interestingly enough, the Valuable 500 initiative, and I'll very briefly in 3 words explain what that is, has through research found that putting the human at the center of business almost negates the need for fuzzy inclusion agendas. It makes business sense. It makes business sense to draw talent from across the diversity of population. And I think one of the problems we've got in the disability sector is that the moment we see or talk about a person with disability, we see the inability. We see how do we fix that, how do we get this person to fit in, how do we. And I want to ask us, and I want you to ask yourself and be honest with yourself. When last did you open the conversation by saying to a person with a disability, what are your passions? What are your dreams? What's your vision? What are the skills you bring to the table? What has your disability gifted you with? How did you survive the scenarios Advocate Malachi described at school level? How did you survive that and get out of that with education? What is that talent in you that I can use in my company? What's that insight that I can use for my bottom line? And I think that's one of the first issues in accountable allyship, that as for ourselves we need to make that mind change, to really advocate. And I think any young person would tell you that in some way our constitutional democracy has failed them. It has failed 3 generations of young people in general, but young people with disabilities in particular. Our millennials that were born in 1980 and sort of exited the millennial into Gen Z in 1994, as our democracy dawned. Born in 1994, your life did not deliver, the democracy did not deliver what we promised. Very much same for the current Generation Z, born up to 2009. Have you got a different prospect when you get out of school to bridge the gap between education and economic independence? And today I want us as allies to say, what will we do differently? What would we do intentionally to change this for Generation Alpha? that are born between 2010 and 2024? What promise can we make them about the kind of allyship we will show and the kind of intentional measures we will take to change that? Young people with disability has no sense of belonging. Therefore, they have no sense of dignity, and often they have a lack of self-worth. And regrettably, too many of them have internalized the ableism and the crap that society throws at them. As society, we owe them to fix that. To admit that some of the internalized ableism they struggle with was caused by us. And we therefore need to fix it. And therefore I really want to applaud the institutions like the National Youth Development Agency that has been really grappling for too long with this issue around young people with disabilities. But they're making progress. They're continuously struggling. As allies, I want us to ask, every time we do anything, we put out a media statement, we write a policy, we write a program, we fund a program, we create a workplace policy, we fund an educational program, are we leaving people with disabilities behind? Because it does not help to every once in 10 remember them and make mention of them or put a provision in, because you have excluded 9 times. If we can do that, we would stop needing targeted, separate programs for people with disabilities, because they will be everywhere. If we are true allies, we would understand that. And I want to ask ourselves today, are we brave enough to suck at something new? Because often it is the fear that we will fail that holds us back. Are we brave enough to suck at something new, at doing things differently, at doing new things altogether? And my call to action, therefore, is that we rethink our allied behavior into how do we take intentional, overt, consistent responsibility to dismantle the systems of oppression from which we derive power, privilege, and acceptance. And that's a task each and one of us must do, even young people with disabilities, because we are not all the same. And I think too often we speak of young people with disabilities as if they are a homogeneous group. The statistics that were quoted, Chairperson, does not take into cognizance the millions of children, young people with dyslexia, with other invisible disabilities struggling with mental health issues, because the census form simply does not ask those questions, and therefore they fall through the cracks. Capable young people that have enormous levels of resilience, have developed insights. Yes, there's something they struggle with, but that struggle has unleashed so much other strengths and abilities within them. And I really want us to look at how our allyship can become a manifestation of solidarity. Regrettably, when it comes to economic liberation, intention and practice diverge in opposite directions, too often. And the biggest disservice we can do to young people with disability is to practice performative allyship. And we have seen too much of that over the past 25 years. The slogans, the tweets, the hashtags, with no action that lies behind them. And I think that does more damage than actually having stayed silent. Because it creates hope, it creates a sense of a falsehood that we do not live up to. So if we want to do a disservice to the agenda, we must continue with performative allyship. And I really, really want us to introspect and see what of our intentions and actions fit into that category, and how do we do it differently so that it becomes accountable, actionable allyship. Because real allyship lies in the courage to take a clear position and to embark on a sincere reconstruction of values, tested against unconscious biases, which will transcend heroic utterances in true defense of those who have been marginalized intellectually, financially, and emotionally. And persons with disabilities fall in all three of those categories. Fortunately, it's not a moment. It's not an event like today, but it's a journey. And I think part for me is, how do we present that journey? How do we journey that journey with excitement, with innovation, with creation? How do we tap into our happy mojo, happy hormones, and not unleash our stress hormones as advocates and how we show allyship? And again, I want to say, are you brave enough to probably suck at doing something new? My experience has been, yes, people get very angry when you make mistakes. But if they know it was done with sincere intention, that you afforded respect and dignity, it becomes a learning journey together. And that's really my call today. And I'm going to just raise a few questions within that. And I know I'm running for 11 seconds over time, so I'm concluding. But I really want to ask, are you a consumer or a producer of innovation and talent? Do you sit back as an employer and wait for talent to arrive on your doorstep developed by somebody else? Or do you climb in there and go back and say, which educational programs are we funding? Which educational what's my involvement in school education? What's my involvement in creating schools where all children belong and where all children participate equally? Because then we do not have to worry about workplace integration, about workplace sensitization, because we grew up together. And it's really around, how do I as a parent reassess how I decide whether a school is a school of excellence? Does the inclusive values of that school matter in me deciding if it's a school of excellence or a school of not? And I think, just in my concluding comments, one of the diversions we've seen, and I really, really want to speak to employers here, and this is a real debate we need to have as an ongoing debate, is the difference between policy intention and unintentional consequences. Learnerships in particular. It had excellent intention. It has become a money spinner for companies, with absolute disregard for the rights and aspirations and hopes of young people with disabilities. There are companies that make as much as 50,000 rand out of every learner on a learnership. That learner takes home 2,100 rand a month, with no outcome, some of them being warehoused off-site, so that they are beneficial to the pocket, but not to the economy. We need to have these difficult conversations. And my call to people here is, start those conversations, lead those conversations, but with fact, and by showing absolute accountable allyship. Be confident enough to do that. Create those spaces for young people with disabilities to step in and self-advocate. Don't speak on their behalf, but speak with them. Give them the agency that they need to make that difference. I'm going to conclude with, I think, person that had most probably teachings had the most impact on my life as a young white Afrikaner girl entering the democracy of South Africa. And that was Paulo Freire. And I'm going to paraphrase it a bit, to affirm that men and women are persons. Young men and women with disabilities are persons. And as persons should be free. And yet to do nothing tangible to make this affirmation a reality is a farce. Let us, as accountable allies, make a tangible difference to the lives. Yes, I can. Yes, we can. And yes, we want to. Thank you. I know I stole 3 minutes, sorry.
It's fine. You know what? We don't have to stick religiously to time. I think we can use the timelines as a guide, but I think it's important. It's important for us to remain true to the conversation. What we want is to interrogate the issues, right? So there's no point in us sticking to time when we don't have enough time, when we don't give each other an opportune moment to interrogate the issues that we're gathered here to do. So please, presenters, don't feel too bad if you go over time. It's absolutely fine. So thank you, Ms. Pretorius, for that fantastic presentation. I think I was struck as well by what you said is us versus them. And I think in academia, we refer to that as the process of othering. You think of them as others, and you remove yourself, in a sense. It creates some kind of distance. And in a lot of ways, you forget about the personhood, you forget about the humanity through that process of othering. And so I think it's important to go back, to take a step back and think of everyone, think of us all. We are all humanity, right? Even though we are diverse. And so I think I'd like to also highlight and just remind us all that something she said, which I think was powerful, is that at every step ask, are we leaving persons with disabilities behind? Thank you for that presentation. Our next speaker will be joining us all the way from Nairobi. Due to the wonderful miracle that is the internet. The next speaker is Collins Ombajo. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. He is Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Action Network for the Disabled. And his presentation is on the insights gained from the innovation to inclusion project implemented in Kenya towards catalyzing disability inclusion in the workplace and providing pertinent lessons that South Africa can draw from the Kenyan experience. So just a little bit more about Collins. So Collins is the Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Andy Network for the Disabled, an NPO working to achieve equality, inclusion, and empowerment of children and youth with disabilities in Kenya through mainstreaming this group into all aspects of daily life. He has over 8 years' experience in advocacy and mainstreaming disability-related issues from a chain of organizations including United Disabled Persons of Kenya, Girl Child Network, Albinism Society of Kenya, and Light for the World, where he acquired experience in a number of aspects in relation to disability-inclusive development. He is passionate about advancing causes of gender and disability within the context of inclusive development. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Collins Ombajo, I hope we can be able to put him up on the screen. Thank you. Sorry, can I stop you, Mr. Ombajo? I'm not sure if you hear me, but we just don't have sound. We just need to sort that out. Okay, let's try again now. Go ahead, Mr. Ombajo.
Thank you. 1, 2, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am Collins Ombajo, just as I have been introduced. I currently work with Action Network for the Disabled as a diversity and inclusion officer. My experience has been in championing for the rights of persons with disability, starting from education and currently in employment. I'm based in Kenya, Nairobi City, to be precise. The best thing that has happened in Kenya is that we've just in an aftermath of an election era where we have elected new leadership individuals, and the best thing is that we can count up to 6 individuals with disabilities who have won elective positions both in the National Assembly, the County Assembly, and to an extent, a woman representative as a member of the National Assembly with disability. So this is a win for the community of persons with disability in Kenya. Allow me to pick it up from my predecessors on matters championing and linking education and employment for persons with disability. And at this point, kindly allow me to mute my, to close out my video so that I can be able to access my notes and also to enhance audibility. I am speaking from a project that I implemented starting in mid-2019 to this year in April that the project closed out. Well, the project was dubbed Innovation to Inclusion, basically championing for inclusive employment for persons with disability with diverse experiences. It was noted that there's a need actually to champion inclusive education, but again, link it to inclusive employment. There's no need of fighting for the rights of persons with disability in the education space and then leaving them to struggle finding employment on their own. Look at the toil and torment that people do go into the labor market after school. It's a whole journey to look for an employment. And given that one has a disability, it's additionally cumbersome. So, well, the Innovation to Inclusion program that was championed by Leonard Cheshire in Kenya was also implemented in Bangladesh, and we shared a lot on the best practice and how best we could emulate programs between the two countries. So, well, allow me to share a bit of the best practice emanating from the project I implemented. I bet I'll be able to talk all this in the 10 minutes provided. So, the spheres of my talk will look at the national systems. These are policies or policies. These are the enabling environment that enhance inclusive employment for persons with disability. And again, I'm also looking at the private sector. This is where the long-lasting change to the supply of wage employment for women and men with disability is based on. So if a country is basically inclusive to individuals with disability, they will appreciate their efforts and their diversity, that they'll not be looking at their disability per se, but their competence in the labor market. And again, I'm looking at the community. If the community is well enabled to accommodate individuals with disability, then all can be well that can enhance this individual to work effectively and also be productive at work. So my talk will revolve around answering 4 questions that have kind of made inclusive employment in Kenya peak pace and also be appreciated by both the public and private sectors. So my first question, how can accessible technology be used to engage and retain women and men with disability in workplace? Well, in Kenya, the law provided for creation of a National Council for Persons with Disability. This is government agency mandated to champion for the rights of persons with disability within the government and in the private sector. So this being there, it also registers individuals with disabilities in Kenya and also has a database of persons with disability. This was incepted in Kenya by a policy, the Disability Act of 2003 that emanated from the laws of Kenya, the Constitution of Kenya. So, well, the project worked closely with the National Council for Persons with Disability in Kenya to come up with an inclusive employment portal, basically targeting individuals with disability who are in employment or job seekers with disability, to be able to link them with available job opportunities and also their potential employers. Having taken the potential employers through inclusive employment spaces and also supported adjustments in their work environments that can influence accommodation of persons with disability in their workspace. So the Innovation to Inclusion project, which I supported for 3 years, in the implementation sphere, partnered with the National Council for Persons with Disability, the national body mandated to cater for the interests of persons with disability, to create and run a career portal, which is an all-powered digital space that offers job matching and e-learning modules for individuals with disability and employers alike, with web-accessible portals and standards that are inclusive to job seekers with disability. The objectives of coming up with this job portal was, one, to increase access, retention, and progression of persons with disabilities in employment. And secondly, the portal was to give persons with disabilities the confidence to engage with signed up employers with the knowledge that the employers are disability sensitive. And then thirdly, the portal was to increase independence of persons with disabilities by providing them with a wider understanding of their career paths and inform future career decisions. And again, the portal was to support persons with disability acquire a broad understanding of how their disability-related access and needs can be met by employers. And lastly, to help establish a sustainable long-term solution to supporting employment of persons with disability in Kenya and beyond. So, well, since the project phased out, the portal remained with the government agency, and this is the best way to sustain initiatives that are inclusive, that engage individuals with disability, just passing them to the government bodies that can easily run and effectively, continually engage persons with disability. So to date, the portal is still on, run by the National Council for Persons with Disability. Persons with disability continually access the portal to seek for jobs and also to enhance their capability of retainers in jobs through the various modules, course modules available in the career portal. My second question to check around is, how can social protection systems better enable women and men with disabilities to cover the additional costs of work? We understand that disability employment comes with reasonable accommodation, and this accommodation to some extent need proper or prearranged initiatives by the said employer, and also the systems. I talked of the policies and laws that enhance inclusion of persons with disability. In Kenya, for example, it is legal that all public buildings must be built in a universal design. This enhances access by all individuals, disability notwithstanding. So look at this from the design of public spaces. Persons with disability can access. Look at a wide doorway to an entrance of a given office, or say a story building with a well-spaced lift, and the doorway is also equally inclusive to individuals with disability and their interests. So this enhances access. This again enhances productivity in any given employment space. So starting with reasonable accommodation, like I said, the state in Kenya is mandated by the law to carry out audits, and this is the work of the National Council for Persons with Disability that I talked of initially. It is mandated to carry out audits of public buildings to ensure that they conform to the provisions of the law. And again, secondly, there is also, the project also ventured into training employers on reasonable accommodations to cater for the interests of diverse persons with disabilities.
I'm sorry, Collins, to interrupt you. Just to let you know that, can you begin to wind up in about 2 minutes, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. So talking of reasonable accommodation is to enhance access and also competence of persons with disability in their work environment. And again, the best thing that also was opened by the government and employers didn't know, I have to speak of this, is providing of incentives, tax incentives to employers. This was little known, but it was also anchored in the laws of Kenya. Employers that have certain percentage of threshold of employees within their workforce are entitled to tax incentives by the government. Additionally, employers that enhance accessibility in their work environment, like say constructing access, inclusive access points, are also entitled to tax rebates by the government. This was little known to employers. We educated them on this and also supported them to access the rebates. So this, to some extent, enhanced inclusion of persons with disability in the workforce. And again, the third question that again I do wish to quickly speak about is how can organizations of persons with disability be active in engaging employers to accommodate and even engage persons with disability in their workforce. So the best thing that organizations of persons with disability can do is advocacy. Most organizations of persons with disability work around advocacy. And this is another thing that I'd wish the Nelson Mandela Foundation to work around, capacitating their networks of organizations of persons with disability to be able to advocate. In Kenya, the recent census established that populations of persons with disability are at 2.2%. This is a lower threshold given the UN standards estimates that a given population has 15% persons with disability. So these statistics were disputed by organizations of persons with disability and civil society organizations alike. Again, the government body mandated to conduct census, the National Bureau of Statistics, acknowledged that these statistics were not right, and also engaged persons with disability and their organizations alike to come up with approaches that could enhance real data collection of persons with disability in Kenya. Remember, advocacy-driven data on advocacy is what informs service provision in any given population. So yes, the government of Kenya has ventured into a whole new survey to give actual data of persons with disability in Kenya. This is ongoing. It was an initiative by the Innovation to Inclusion project that I worked under. And just to wrap up, and thank you for this opportunity, is to say and to continually amplify the rallying call that is now common to persons with disability. It is very prominent in Kenya here. It goes nothing about us without us. We need to see persons with disability in all spheres of life. This is not a favor, it is a right enshrined in all the constitutional tools and documents available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Collins, for sharing with us some of the good practices that you're seeing there in Kenya, such as the requirement for universal design, the requirement for carrying out audits, and also tax incentives for employers who have a certain percentage of persons with disabilities in their employ. So thank you for that. I will move very quickly to our final presentation. Our final presentation will be by Ms. Nontobeko Mdluli, who is the Vice Chairperson and Head of Talent and Diversity at South African Employers Forum for Disability. Her presentation will be on the role that the private sector can play in catalyzing the meaningful integration of persons with disabilities into the workplace. Just a little bit about Nontobeko. She serves as on the board of the South African Employers Forum for Persons with Disabilities, wherein she heads up the talent and diversity portfolio. She is a multi-talented and experienced business director, transformation specialist, board and corporate governance leader with 20 years strategic and operations management experience, working in challenging roles in consulting, FMCG, and retail sectors. Having started Zanati Group in 2005 as a boutique recruitment firm, she has managed to transform the company into a one-stop human capital solution outlet. The company specializes in executive search, response handling, employee assessments, diversity and inclusion, as well as offers support to various boards. Nontobeko has a strong interest and passion for advocacy and NPO work, and is thus part of the Girl Scout movement in South Africa. She also runs an annual entrepreneur mentor program, which provides small business support to underprivileged women in marginalized communities. Nontobeko holds an industrial psychology honors degree from UNISA, BCom Industrial Psychology from the University of the Western Cape, and also an MDP certificate from the University of the Witwatersrand. Please help me welcome Nontobeko. Thank you.
Good morning. It's midday, actually. I'm going to speak on behalf of the SA Employers for Disability this morning. A lot has been said, and speakers before me have spoken, both on behalf of persons living with disabilities, as well as those who spoke on behalf of even the public sector and lobby organizations as well. The SA Employers for Disability is an employer lobby organization. Our members are corporate. Our members are the public sector. Our members are government, and our members are business. The chairperson of our organization is Losh. She's not here today this morning. We are a collective of professionals actively engaged in bringing corporate employers, business employers, government employers onto the table, so to speak. So today everyone is talking about how to bridge the gap between labor for persons with disabilities as well as education. One of the speakers spoke about, I think it's Lydia, spoke about the almost ridiculous nature of the learnership initiative and what has been happening to our young people. I'm not really going to go over all the slides I had prepared because a lot has been said. But I want us to interrogate the subject of bridging the gap between education and labor for young people. I think a lot of us know that recently Mr. Aaron Motsoaledi, the Minister of Home Affairs, created 10,000 jobs. I'm not sure how many of us know the exact percentage that Mr. Aaron Motsoaledi has put aside or set aside for young persons with disabilities. I don't. And I think 2% of that 10,000 should be set aside for young persons with disabilities. Now, we as the SA Employers for Disability are there to advocate the public sector, employers, government, and business, as I say. I want to jump to a slide. Oh, I have the, sorry. Okay, I want to jump to this slide. So I am in the employment space myself in my personal capacity. And I can tell you that there is a huge divide between the skill set that we've got in terms of young persons with disabilities, as well as the opportunities that are available in business, in the public sector, and anywhere else you can think of. So the challenge we are facing is that young persons with disabilities are not qualified. And I say this with tears in my eyes because I do work with young persons with disabilities. And this is to the point Lydia made, that young persons with disabilities are being relegated to continuous and perpetual meaningless learnerships. So I want to speak to this grid that we prepared, that we found. In fact, we didn't prepare this grid. I mean, there's obviously a disclaimer there who prepared this grid, but we found it quite an interesting way of taking a snapshot just in terms of what we can do as employers. And I believe there's employers in the room, just to make sure that we bring persons with disabilities into the workplace. We've got to be very specific, setting goals with enough detail to know what success looks like. And that really brings me to the point of role modeling. I was highly impressed when Advocate Malachi spoke, and we all learned that he was admitted as an advocate in 1977. And I just feel like young people with disabilities haven't got enough role models to look up to. And when we begin to show our young people what success looks like, perhaps we can start somewhere. And this is what success looks like. Measurable. So if we say we are employers who are proactive and want to embark on a journey, are we setting goals that are quite quantifiable? Are we setting goals that are quantifiable as employers? Action-oriented. Can we write down our goals in terms of action points? And I know there's one big goal that everyone is working towards, and that goal is called 2%. But that cannot be the only goal. And someone also spoke to, I think it was Lydia again, spoke to they will be everywhere. Once we start interrogating the subject, they will be everywhere. That 2% will not be a thing. The next is realistic. Are we realistic as employers? I'm talking to employers this morning. Are we realistic? So when we say we want to embark on the journey, are we realistic? Can we accommodate? Are we ready? This speaks to the readiness and preparedness, our ability to help persons with disabilities land. Are they going to land safely within our organizations? The next one is timely. Do we set timelines, or are we just vague in terms of our goal setting? We have a 2%, but we haven't set timelines. We have a goal to bring X amount of graduates, and we haven't set a timeline. And personally, because I do executive search in my personal capacity, I speak to clients and I let them know that I'm not going to work for you if you are looking to recruit learners. I want graduates, but where do we find them? Next. I'm not going to speak to the slides because it's already, everyone's already touched on these key points. I want to come and speak to the slide at this time. What we as the SA Employers for Disability have ascertained is that we need to collaborate. But we need to collaborate not at a point where young people are already stranded, looking for employment and desperate, but at a point where they are still at school, and preferably from grade 8. So when we sit here, we should have young people sitting and representing. And that is the level of collaboration that we are looking at. That is the level of involvement that we are looking at. That is a partnership. So we want to partner with high schools, feeder schools, schools that are producing these young people, because we want to say from grade 8, do you know what you want to do post high school? Do you know which tertiary institution you want to go to? The reason why a lot of young people are being propelled into meaningless learnerships is because a lot of them have only a matric. They have no degrees, no diplomas, no tertiary education. So we want to say, let's partner with high schools so that children from grade 8 already have created an aspiration. Institutions of higher learning. We need to have UJ, we need to have WITS, we need to have Pretoria, we need to have Stellenbosch, we need to have all of them in the room because they need to prepare to receive the children when they graduate from high school. But also career guidance. Are we limiting our children in terms of even the type of faculties they are going to land at when they get to university? Are we telling them that you can be an advocate, you can be an attorney, you can be an engineer? I struggle to find, last week or 2 weeks ago, I was looking for a medical doctor, and the client is prepared to appoint a person with a disability. I could not find them. I could not find them. Why? Because they have not gone to university and pursued medical studies. Why not? Because matric results could not allow them to. Why not? Because from grade 8, they dropped maths. They do maths literacy. Why? Why? So how are we going to create a pipeline? Because we are tired of talking learnerships continuously for young people. No career prospects. We are wanting to talk career path. Lastly, corporate, the NGOs such as the Nelson Mandela Foundation, lobby organizations such as the Human Rights Commission, and ourselves. We need to sit around the table. So these are the partners we want to see. But the key thing that I want to drive this morning is that we want to see children, young people, becoming a part of. Someone said nothing for us without us. Someone said it this morning. That's precisely what it is. If young people are not aware of what is happening, they need to understand that while they are in high school, this is what business, corporate, and government is preparing for them. They need to build that aspiration. So in a nutshell, these are the pillars that we as the SA Employers for Disability are looking at engaging. And this is, of course, in addressing today's topic. So I just want to say that as the SA Employers for Disability, we have partnered with service providers of various skills sets. And I think someone earlier spoke to the question of not knowing what to do, employers not knowing how to go about getting started. And someone said, you must be willing to suck at it. And I think that's really the key message, is that employers have to be prepared to be bad at it. And that's the only way to get started. Educators, institutions of higher learning, all these collaborative partners need to be prepared to be bad at it, just to get started. So these are just some of the key proposals that we're making in terms of bridging the education and labor divide for young people with disabilities. So that brings us to the end. I think I've covered my 10 minutes. I've cut out on a whole lot of slides, but I would like to thank you, and I would like to invite you, because we are looking for partnerships. We are looking for employers. Some of our clients include Accenture. I know some clients were mentioned to have received awards for doing well, but we have clients who are committed as the SA Employers for Disability in terms of embracing the journey of bringing persons with disabilities. Accenture is a consulting firm, and of course we are looking for graduates. They are looking for graduates, young persons who have a skill set. We have Road Accident Fund, we have ESCOM, we have the public sector, we have private sector members within the SA Employers for Disability, and our doors are open, and we are looking to foster more partnerships, and especially if there's anyone from institution of higher learning and even high schools, our doors are open, and we would like to have a discussion. Our website is www.sae4d.co.za. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nontobeko, for that presentation, and also for highlighting the need for the private sector to create strategic partnerships with high schools, for example, and inspire learners with disabilities to strive for any career that they see fit for themselves, and also to partner with institutions of higher learning so that they can be prepared to receive them. I think that's a very important takeaway, so thank you so much for that. So I would like to, this marks the end of the formal presentations, but we are now entering into a session where we can engage with the panelists, where you guys can engage with the panelists. So I'd like to invite all the panelists to please take a seat here on the seats in front, and then to ask the audience to think of questions to pose to the panelists. I will just, in terms of guidelines, if you can try to ask one question at a time, and if you can try to make your question as concise as possible, without turning it into a presentation, but make your question as concise as possible. If your question is directed to a specific panelist, please do say so. And if you are sort of just throwing it out there for any of the panelists who would like to tackle that question, that's also okay. And finally, please bear in mind that we have sign language interpretation that is going on. So do pace yourself and don't speak too fast so that the sign language interpreter can keep up with the interpretation. Please go ahead, ladies and gentlemen. And am I allowed to take this mic off the stand? I can? Or I can use one of these? I can take this one. Okay. All right. So are there any questions? Sorry, I feel a bit confined behind. Are there any questions? So what we'll do is we'll take rounds of questions. So I'll take the first round. I'll take about 3 questions from people that are in the room and 3 questions from people that are online. Then we'll give it to the panelists to address those questions, and then if we, depending on time, we'll go through another round of questions. We'll do it that way. Okay, so first round of questions with people in the room. Yes, please, go ahead. I don't know if there's someone, oh, over there, sorry.
Thank you very much. Should I remain seated? Is that fine?
As you wish.
Okay.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Thank you so much. And I really do wish that we are also given time as the audience to say what we would like to say and not be restricted, as it were.
You have time.
And I'll be brief, Chairperson. Thank you very much. I would like to. Well, it's not my duty, but I feel obliged to thank the organizers for just an incredible work that they've done to organize such an important. It's not an event. But it's an important dialogue around these issues. Very, very critical, very important. Now, to come to the questions, this one goes to the National Youth Development Agency. I'm an M&E practitioner, and you know, when people start talking about strategies, I am very much intrigued. So my question is to anyone from the NYDA or the chair, please expand on the strategy that you have developed as the NYDA to ensure inclusion of people with disabilities. And related to this question is, what are the outcomes and impact does the NYDA seeks to see out of the implementation of the said strategy? Well, I didn't introduce myself. I didn't. My name is Simo Zulu from the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And another one is it's about the programs. Dr. Bam, thank you very much again on your presentation. In my other life, I worked in the higher education and training department, and this issue was very, very important for us to say, what is the link between education and employability? What is the purpose of education? Is it just to get a certificate or a qualification? Is to get the skills and all of that? Are we doing it for people just to get the knowledge, the skills, and the whatever else? But again, to have that and not be employed and not be employable is a challenge. And if you look at employment statistics and the quarterly labor force survey statistics speaks for themselves. I think this is not so much of a question but a comment, but to thank you for your presentation, which just enlightened us in our thinking around these issues. And lastly, Commissioner Malachi, I am very much happy and proud of your presentation. I wish missing in this discourse is 3 departments: Department of Social Development, Department of Basic Education, and Higher Education, Science and Innovation. I wish they were here. I really do. But just looking at the education element, not the economic cluster. Those ones have another issues that we need to take up. But when you look at the education element, I'm very much proud of the work that the Human Rights Commission has done. I wish we could just take the very document and send it to government and say, what are the possible interventions that you could make out of what the Human Rights Commission has said and has identified as some of the areas that we need to look at. Issues of inclusive education, fundamentally important. I don't want to exhaust issues and give it to other people to talk, but thank you very much.
Okay, so there's the gentleman in the white shirt, and ma'am, you're next. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mfundo. I'm from the Ekurhuleni Youth Directorate. I think it's just one question that I want to ask, and this is informed by the disagreements that I normally have with colleagues, and I've had these for the past perhaps 5 years where I'm employed. With colleagues, when we go for our strat plan every year, we're having this disagreement. And I think perhaps you can also assist me to strengthen the position that I've been trying to advance. Because there's a disagreement in terms of the strategies that we must employ to ensure that there is inclusiveness in terms of the strategies that we use to deliver services to all the people of the city of Ekurhuleni, and particularly to be inclusive to young persons living with disability, or young persons with disability, sorry. So, for example, I always propose that we should have programs that are targeted at youth with disabilities, and there are disagreements. You'll be told that, no, you are profiling them, and so on and so forth. Why do you want to exclude youth with disabilities from general youth and all of that? So, and eventually, I think from my observation, it disadvantages youth with disability because they end up being excluded from a lot of the programs that we do for young people. So if you don't have, my position is that if you don't have targeted programs, you are definitely disadvantaging youth with disabilities. And I'm saying, there's been a back and forth disagreement where I'm employed, with colleagues for the past 5 years. And, we've not had, for example, a program that speaks specifically to youth with disabilities, targeting youth with disabilities in various areas. So I'm saying, I'm not sure what is the view of the panel and the view of the House, perhaps, on this issue, because I'm saying I've had this disagreement with colleagues for 5 years, and so far I'm not winning, Yeah, so maybe perhaps the House and the panelists can, I don't know, maybe I'm the one who's seeing things my own way. Maybe you can assist to strengthen my position, or perhaps that of the colleagues whom I've been having this back and forth disagreement with. Thanks.
Thank you. Ma'am? Right there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Masa Benz Ngamashe from an NPO called Aspire, Psychosocial and Educational Support Services for Vulnerable Children. It's based in the Eastern Cape, but I am interested to hear from Ms. Nondobeko Mdluli about the relationship you seek with high schools, because ours is more like an after-school program, but we have high school children, and we really want them to start thinking. In fact, it starts with grade 5s, that is the intermediate phase and senior phase. But from that age, we want them to start thinking about their careers. We do work with them on that. But I just want to know, what sort of relationship do you really have, or you want to establish with high schools? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so let's pause for a second. I do see that there's additional hands, but let's pause for now so we don't have too many questions at once. So I'm going to give it to the panelists to address these questions, and then after that we'll go to the online and then back again to the room. Okay, so we can go from from my right to my left, or whatever. From Dr. Baum going that way. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to respond very briefly to the notion of education, and then come to something regarding the way that business operates. Where the failure within our education system sits at the moment is, as you've rightly pointed out, there's been a slowly but surely a wiping out of skills-based programs over time. Not everybody needs to go to a university, and that's problematic. We think it's something wonderful, but what we end up with is certificates and people who cannot deliver and produce. I also think it's far too late to start with entrepreneurial programs when it is that people enter university or a tertiary education environment, and that's where I think we need to address the aspect of education from our early childhood development. That's where the money should be going. I want to say we're almost a lost generation in ways, but we can change the future by putting the money where it actually matters. When it comes to business's role, and it's something that Lydia said, but and maybe she can respond to this. The business case for the inclusion of people with disabilities is nothing new. In agrarian societies, in our evolution as a society, people with disabilities were included because every body mattered. Every physical body mattered. You had to participate in the production of goods to ensure the survival of society. And so my call is to move beyond the notion of the business case. If it is the business case that is sufficient, why is it that the numbers are still so low? It's more than that. We've got to move beyond that. And at the same time, we cannot berate business then when it is that they do learnerships, because that is very profitable. And so the question is, what is missing? If we look somewhere in the Enlightenment period, was the introduction of this person, the manager, who comes in to decide who does what. And that is where the imperfect body, as I say in inverted commas, was sidelined within our society. So we've got to address this notion of where is the failure within business at the moment. And it sits around the values, the principles, and the morality with which business leaders act. Because if they understood better, they would be doing the right thing, and not only what makes sense to the bottom line. And then just Advocate Malachi, we're busy with a study at the moment that looks at special schools and the role that teachers and guidance counselors play, and I say this in inverted commas, it's still to be published, at how they discourage students to take on maths, science. And the logical progression there is, if there are fewer students wanting to do those subjects, the schools put fewer resources into it. The education department then says, well, there's no need. And that is to answer why it is we don't have scientists, medical doctors, who have disabilities working within the sector. And so we need to also choose where it is and what it is that we direct our attention to.
Thank you. Commissioner Malachi.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. I think, firstly, I could just affirm what Dr. Baum is saying, in that, you know, in my work, I've done several inspections in loco in some of the special schools for the disabled. And I have in the process discovered a lot of shocking gaps that are there in those schools. In the first place, in terms of underfunding, as I've said, of the schools. And secondly, in terms of the support staff that these special schools are lacking. For instance, they don't have, most of them do not have social workers, they do not have psychiatrists, they do not have occupational therapists, and you know, most shockingly also, you found that you know, the Department of Education, in their so-called, I think they call it an R&R program, where teachers, irrespective of their qualification, you know, they are just thrown to those schools to go and teach there. You find that the teachers do not have the skills, they have not been trained to deal with disabled children, they don't have that passion of developing a disabled child. So what do you expect the results to be? So the result is that these children, you know, they come out not being well developed and not less prepared, you know, to get into the labor force. And the labor force has the least appetite to hire those people because they've not been granted the necessary skills and foundation. And we are at the moment partnering with other organizations. For instance, your Equal Education Center Law and other like organizations where we are forming, as I've said, this advisory committee, you know, so that we face the government to implement some of the reports, good reports and researches that have been made in respect of special schools, that, you know, the department should implement the recommendations made in those reports. And as such, and we believe strongly, and I personally also believe that should some of these good reports and recommendations which were made by researchers be implemented, we'll have a different crop of young people who will be ready to enter the labor market with the necessary skills and that they can compete successfully with their peers. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm aware of time, and I know there's another round of questions. I want to just touch on two things, and I think let me get the one just out of the way, and that's around accountability. I spoke about accountable allyship. We make recommendations. We do the research. We take the policy decisions. No action, no accountability, no consequences. We need a conversation around accountability in the human rights space. Linked to that is, and again, I'm really wary that we generalize. I don't know if there are graduates with disabilities unemployed seeking employment in this audience. I have my inbox full of graduates, millennials, Generation G, did their homework, stuck it out in school, survived it, went to university, acquired themselves with a decent profession-specific qualification, and they are offered learnerships by employers. Not one, not two, I've got an inbox full of them. They are either too disabled, or too underqualified, or too overqualified. Always an excuse. And we need to call spades spades. If employers are serious, the graduates are waiting. And they're not waiting for learnerships or perpetual internships. I know of people that have degrees at honors level, 6 years of experience in that, in internships, and can still not land a permanent position. They go for the interviews, they do good interviews, but there's always somebody else. And then my last input just is in terms of, and I want to tackle the Ekurhuleni issue, because I think it also links up with the 2% issue. There's one swear word in this country, it's 2% for those that know me. So apologies. We need both. We need what we call a twin track approach. And the reason for that I want to explain to you, because that might help you to explain it better. We want equality and we want equity. We want to narrow the inequality gap. People with disabilities have been left behind over a long period. So they're not on the equal starting line. So to stay at least in an equitable way, we need to target any participation in any economic program, our policy says, that is at least concurrent with the population demographic of that group in that area. So you can't target 2% if the economically active population is 5%, because then you are planning to widen the inequality gap. And the same in your programs. So yes, you need to include disabled youth in all programs. It requires measures. It requires intention. Won't happen by itself. All that will do is to bring about equity going forward. It doesn't wipe out the inequality of the past. For that, we need redress and we need affirmation. And one of the ways to do it is to increase the percentage target participation. So population demographic for young people in Ekurhuleni might be 4%. So what do? You target 10%. So you're starting to narrow that gap. Or what you do is you do targeted programs. But it's not just a targeted program. It's a targeted program that closes the gap on a specific skill set so that that group next year can participate in the mainstream program. They're ready for it. It's closing that gap. So yes, you do need both. But see it as, how do we catch up on the backlog, the redress affirmation, and then how do we keep up with inclusion going forward? But both of them require specific measures. Come to me afterwards. I can give you my contact details if you want to engage on that further. Thanks.
All right. So again, I'm speaking on behalf of the employers. The issue of learnerships versus meaningful job opportunities. So what I'm saying to you as an employer, if you're an employer in the audience, is you look at your organization, you look at your vacancies that you've got, you look at entry-level vacancies that you've got, not a learnership, but proper entry-level vacancies that any person who begins a career would want to find themselves in. And there you start. Appoint young people. I know someone from Ekurhuleni spoke about how intentional they are about even the segmenting and labeling or clustering and saying these jobs are for persons with disabilities. I agree with that, because if we are not intentional, of course we are not going to make progress. But I always say, look at the young people that she's sitting with in her inbox who are graduates. Decide these positions, no discussion. There is no young person who is going to enter the workforce with experience. We all started somewhere. It's not fair to expect young people to come in, as she says, there's always something wrong. Too qualified, underqualified, etc., etc. If a young person has a diploma or degree, remember, abled young people get recruited by corporates. They hold career fairs, they go to universities, and they recruit young people. Where are the young people with disabilities? We've got the CVs. They're in her inbox, hundreds of them. Start by being intentional about these positions. We're looking for a payroll clerk. We are going to take a young person. We are going to spend 6 months training the young person, and that's what it's going to take. I'm not going to go any further than that for now.
I just want to also encourage people. Not all young people with disabilities who are jobs are new in the labor market. Some people are 30 when they acquire disability. Some are qualified as doctors. Couldn't find a job because they were too disabled, it was regarded as. So they started their own NPOs. I know of 2. So I think this notion of disability equals entry level, we also need to dispel. There's a lot of people, especially after COVID, that have had work experience, but they are sent back to learnerships.
Thank you so much. Can I ask Luveshni if we have questions online?
Okay, so I'm going to start with 2 comments, and then there's some direct questions, and then 2 comments to which I've attached questions for any of the panelists. Is it backing? Okay. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to read out from, please forgive me if I mispronounce any names, from Alex Msichana from the Deaf Empowerment Firm. He writes that there needs to be a shift in how disability is viewed by employers and a move towards the creation of truly inclusive workplaces. Employer diversity and inclusion strategies must include disability in their definition to avoid disability inclusion being an afterthought. disability must be a part of the dialogue from policy formation to implementation. Secondly, we have Makhosi Letimile, who says the sooner able-bodied people stop being offended when we tell them about ableism, the sooner we might be able to see change, which I think is also an important point. A question directly for the SAE4D. What strategies are your clients putting into place to ensure absorption of your young people with disabilities post-learnership programs, and what is the exit plan that they have in place? Sue Ellen is also asking, how are employers looking to empower youth with disabilities who are not graduates? Are youth from PACT sector who do not qualify for study or for degrees considered for employment in the industry? And also, what about schools that do not offer the subjects that would allow for learners with disabilities to enter the degree programs sought after by companies? And then the last two comments to which I've attached questions. The first one is from Notukela Makushliso. For years, I have been told I am overqualified. The job market is not accommodating graduates or unskilled people with disabilities. That is my experience. So the question I've attached to that is, we do have educated, skilled graduates who struggle to enter the workplace due to perceptions of persons with disability being persons with inability. Can you talk to the barriers that employers erect that prevent persons with disability from entering and thriving in the workplace? And then also from Tinyiko, you can't see disabled people in workplaces because you aren't looking for them. We are there, and we are many, even fearing self-reporting. My bipolar is seen as a burden to employees if I know I'm applying for a job. So my question attached to that is, there are already employees in employment with invisible disabilities who do not feel safe or secure to disclose their disabilities for fear of discrimination. Can anyone talk to the attitudinal barriers that disable persons with disabilities more than their disability itself?
Thank you. So I will. There was one directed to SA4DE. So I'll ask you to speak to that first, and then there was ones that were not directed to anyone. So I'll just then open it up to the other panelists. Thank you.
Testing. Is it off? All right. So there was a question from Ms. Zimasa from an NGO in the Eastern Cape that works with young persons, some as young as grade 5. And to answer your question, so we want to create a pipeline. This is why we want to bring young people. And we, as much as we want your organization to come partner with us, we want you, though, to lobby the young people. Because what's important is for young people to understand and know that when they finish school, there is a landing pad. There are employers ready to absorb them. But if they don't know that, this is where they get discouraged and despondent and lose ambition or aspiration. So we want them to know from as early as 14 to 16, grade 8 to 10, that when I complete my studies, it's important for me to get my matric. But beyond that, it's important for me to go to a institution of higher learning. Because when I do, Accenture will appoint me. So that is the level of involvement that we are looking at, or partnership. Thank you. And then there was a question from online via Teams in terms of what our strategy is as the SAE4D. So we are lobbying employers. So that's our objective. We lobby employers, but we also lobby in terms of HR policy. So when we lobby employers, we're not just lobbying them for the sake of appointing entry-level graduates or even interns, but we are lobbying even from a policy perspective. So what does your HR policy say in terms of appointing persons with disabilities? And we, in that sense, get their employers ready to receive young people? So of course, the more members we have who are employers, the more opportunities we are able to lobby for young people with disabilities, and not just young people, for anyone who is a professional with disabilities, because then we are the go-to when it comes to issues of employment and talent. But we need to kind of grow and cultivate that talent. So that is what we do. We also lobby in terms of reasonable accommodation. So we look at strategies around reasonable accommodation. So the issue of too deaf or too blind doesn't necessarily need to apply. If employers are ready with Braille, they are ready with JAWS, they are ready with whatever devices that they need to be ready with. Thank you.
Let me start with the notion of being overqualified in that particular experience. And I think together with that, there's the understanding of how it is that people who are highly skilled, highly qualified, are also underemployed once it is that they get work. Where does the challenge start in terms of access to opportunities? And I think for employers, it is as simple as how it is that you communicate what those opportunities are. And we have to move beyond traditional means of doing that. The notion of placing a job ad in a newspaper is not sufficient. And so HR policies need to look at how it is that they make sure that there is access to opportunities and to the networks that inform what those opportunities are. And then just in terms of the notion of invisible disabilities, we're also busy with another study looking at autoimmune diseases and the impact on the workplace. And Advocate Malachim would be disappointed to know that in one of those cases that he mentioned, the 5 companies, there are employers even within those companies who struggle. And it comes down to practice. So while it looks good on policy, in terms of policy, while there might be a disability champion, those people with those hidden or invisible disabilities suffer a different consequence. And I think there's lots of work to be done with that. And where, for me, in terms of attitudinal barriers, I think employers need to look earnestly at how it is that there is, and training is not sufficient. It's the education of managers and co-workers around what it means to include. We're still building buildings with the notion of having to have a ramp rather than having it accessible to all. And so the principles that companies follow are key to ensuring how it is that we can create better opportunities for people with disabilities.
I just want to... That's one. I just want to refer people, and I fully agree. I think in the comments and the questions that came from online, we had both a question and an answer to the question between 2 of them. And the one is that you don't wait for an employee to arrive before you start thinking how to include them. You create an environment of value and inclusion and participation and belonging for all, regardless. Because I think what we also miss sometimes is the intersectionalities. And I always say the inclusion magic happens between the intersectionalities. You know, being a woman, you face certain challenges. You also offer certain insights. Being black, you face challenges, you offer insights. Being disabled, now imagine having those 3 in the same package. How do you start distinguishing? Because it's a unique experience in that intersectionality. But I really want to encourage people that's in the room, but also online, to go to the Valuable 500 webpage and start reading what they are sharing. It's 500 CEOs of the world's largest conglomerates that signed up on disability commitment statements for a specific period of time. They've got 5 or 6 specific areas of work that they do, and they collaborate around that. But it is about looking at inclusion and disability inclusion in particular from a value proposition, from a holistic company ethos and practice perspective, rather than fix the individual, target the individual. And it's really around addressing inclusion over a much broader perspective, but not leaving the disability out of it, because that's what happened with DEI. It's about everybody except disabled people. But really, I want to encourage you to go and look at the work that they are doing, learn from it. A lot of those companies are operational in South Africa, and they're slowly starting to also bring on board some of the learnings in that network. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I would like to talk about this attitudinal barriers that is still there, because I've seen this, and there are cases that were referred to us about this problem. I want to give a very vivid example of employees in the public sector, especially in the education department, where teachers who started work when they were able-bodied, and today, because of we know the AIDS and other things, these teachers have become disabled. You find that the department, all of a sudden, would like to board these teachers as and put them on disability leave. So this is wrong. You like me when I'm still able-bodied. And the minute I become disabled, you don't appreciate me. So it is this type of attitude barriers that prevents disabled people, from being gainfully employed. And this is despite the fact that some of these teachers who become disabled, they've been reskilled at one or the other institution. And the department still does not want to accept these people. And that's the big fight that we as a Human Rights Commission are fighting, that you cannot, as soon as somebody, an able person is disabled in your employ, as soon as you become disabled, you don't need him anymore. So I hope that with the collaboration of people like the SAE and D will help us in that respect to educate their members that they should not discard people because they got disabled whilst they are in their employ. And the other point that I would like to raise also is that in terms of employment of young people with disabilities, we have had this idea and would like to put it into practice, that look, we have more than 1,000 companies that are registered with the stock exchange. And we believe if each company can just pledge to hire about 2 to 3 people in their employ, this will go a great deal in reducing the number of young disabled people who are unemployed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm told we only have time for just 2 final questions from the room. So I must sincerely apologize in advance. I'm going to pick the 2 ladies in front because they had their hands up in the previous session. So I'm very sorry, ma'am. I'm very sorry about that. So I will take your question, ma'am, and then next I'll come to you, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Khomoto, and I'm here in my capacity as a parent. And I must say, I'm listening to this conversation, and I'm a bit breathy because I'm hyperventilating a little bit. You know, I look at this conversation we're talking education and labor. I'm a mother of twin boys on the autism spectrum, which in the school system puts them in a school for intellectual disabilities. So first speaker, matric, well, my kids are out, they're not going all the way to matric. That's not what is offered to them, right? But it's also, sorry, I'm trying to find clean words in my head, but it's also a bit of a mind, right? Where this child who at an age of 3 or 4 can dismantle and put together a phone in the school system can only be offered woodwork, needlework, and maybe a few other things. So I've listened to our conversation, and we've spoken about the professionals. We've spoken about the matriculants. We've tried as a school. So now from the age of about 12 or 10, you then bring in skills, the agricultural skills. But nobody does that. We have an MEC here who does specialization schools. You say to him, sir, throw a few of those tablets this way, because this could work. And we know it works. Why? Because what you test our children to get into schools with is sometimes like IQ levels or what up. I have one of my sons, from the written test to the visual test, there's a 55% difference. So the DCAP system recognizes that we need an 80% more visual and more about skills. But without throwing anybody under the bus, in the conversation we are having here, we are not talking about those. I mean, in our poster, we are not talking about those people. Because here we are talking about bodies, right? And that is what scares me. You know, when Dr. Bam spoke, he spoke about you spoke about the workforce before, and that's what we're trying to do. I was late today because as a treasurer at my SGB, I was writing to the service providers we give the most money to Chamberlains, to all of them, to say, listen, you are actually going to hire our kids. We spend a whole lot of money buying things from you. And just one last example, I'm not here to come and complain, I'm also here to offer solutions. You know, the PYE program was so amazing, the presidential program, because they came in and they wanted the youth, and I thought about it when you're talking about Minister Motsoaledi. And we as parents wrote back to the department and said, listen, 50% of the kids we're going to hire, because you are scanning and doing things for COVID, are going to be our students, because the education system that already kicks them out, Commissioner Malachi, at about 15, they say they're having difficult behavior. Does not make sense. I mean, they only go up to standard 3, standard 5, right? They don't create the space. And luckily for us, the department listened. It listened. But now I have to tell this boy with Down syndrome that, you know what, the program unfortunately is for 3 months, so you can't continue. So the spaces are not created. I mean, when you're talking about that digitization, I looked at the post by Minister Motsoaledi. They're looking for scanners. They're looking for people to shred documents. So you can't even bring in our students there. But like I say, we have the conversation, and I'm thinking, oh my Lord, my kids are only 10. Where are we going? Where are we going? How are we, when we're talking education, are we talking all levels of education? When we're talking the labor market, are we doing the mistake we did in gender, and we're just looking at the CEOs while the rest of the young black women are unemployed? Can we do it differently? And for me, I always go with the spectrum. The spectrum requires you to look at things from all levels. And in this instance, I'm hoping when we leave here, you're going to talk about learners, you're going to talk about education disability, but you're going to talk about all disability and all education and all of the spaces that could exist. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Abongile Kantini. I'm from the Innovation Africa Foundation. I'd like to correct something that I think a lot of us have been getting wrong this morning and afternoon. We've been talking about people being disabled, people with disabilities, and we really need to look at the fact that we we don't have the disabilities. Society has the disabilities. Society is what disables us. I have an impairment. I don't have a disability. As far as I'm concerned, my eyes aren't the ones who are disabled. They don't have the disability, but the door made me disabled when I walked in, or the stairs made me disabled me when I walked in. As far as I'm concerned, I have an impairment. And the minute we start changing the words that we use, we start to realize that people aren't the problem. Society is the problem. And once we look at it that way, we can then mainstream impairments and realize that it is a social ill that we need to fix. And once we start thinking about mainstreaming, we realize that impairments and persons with impairments aren't special, and we don't need special needs. It's quite condescending and patronizing to say, I have a special need. What's so special about needing a guide dog? You know, what's so special about needing a bigger door to come in with my wheelchair? What's so special about getting a page written in Braille? There's nothing special about that. It's just a need, right? So to S-A-E for D, I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you because we aren't trying to get people into work when they've graduated from high school. A lot of kids with impairments can't even get to high school. So how are you wanting the people that you want to recruit with your nice conglomerate of organizations hire people who have gone to varsity when many kids with impairments haven't even passed matric? Because the school education system doesn't allow us to pass. You know, Lydia was saying, thank you, Lydia, for celebrating some of us who've had to struggle through primary school, struggled through high school, struggled to varsity, and still we're unemployed for like a month and a half, even when we've got a great degree and some experience, you know? How are you? I need you. We need you to advocate for us, even when we're not in those high schools yet. Because chances are, we need to know that South African employment for disabilities actually even exists. How am I supposed to go to, I mean, if you go into a high school and there are no people who come to do career things at your school, and nobody comes and says, organizations, go to the school for specialized education. Go to that school, because that's where you will find kids to recruit. You won't find us in high school. Well, you will find us, yes. But look broader than that. That's not the root of the cause. The root of the problem isn't when we're in high school or varsity. It's before we even got there. So that's where you need to look. That's where you need to channel your resources. And if you need us to help you do that, we can help you. We can help you do that. We can help you and your organizations find the people, train them, for them to even understand what they are looking for. Because people don't know what they're looking for. For example, you try to find a doctor. You looked for the doctor in your own mainstream environment. You're not going to find most of us in the mainstream environment because we're marginalized. You need to challenge yourself and look into the pools that aren't mainstream, right? So even the way you approach a problem's got to change because it's marginalized. You're not going to find it in public. And when you do find it in public, it's because we've worked 1,000 times harder for it. So, an advocate, your turn to get fired at. Throwing shots, firing shots. You see, here's the challenge is, I mean, our human rights are violated every day. Somebody posts a job and they go, Lydia and I were talking and she was saying, you know, somebody will say, we want somebody who's visually impaired, or no, sorry, definitely not the visually impaired because they can't do anything. But we need somebody who's maybe in a wheelchair, but not the visually impaired, not the ones who are auditory impaired, because what are we going to do with those, you know? But there's a clear, blatant discrimination there. And y'all don't come up and say, this is unacceptable. Jobs are being advertised every single day with blatant discrimination, and you can't show up for us. Where are you? Right? I mean, we see the Zondo Commission every day on TV. Where's the South African Human Rights Commission? I saw you guys on TV for the July unrest, but that is not the first human rights violation and injustice that's happened that had to go public. I mean, it's also like you mentioned that you have I think a committee for youth, children, and persons with disabilities. Here's the problem with that committee when you cluster all three, is you focus on children or you focus on women, and then you forget about the persons with disabilities. You know, like the Minister of Youth, Children, and Persons with Disabilities, they do a lot for gender-based violence. And I'm just like, where's the, campaigns for discrimination against persons with impairments and who are facing disability every day? It's challenging. And we need to really understand that, Dr. Bam, in these systems, like you said, it's a collective environment. But we also help teachers and we help people who are working in this space realize their own insensitivities to impairments and the people, the disabilities people face every day. And we would like to engage further with you on that. But I think when we have to look at education and labor, we can't think that this solution can only be faced and looked at through normal ways of doing business. This challenges us to think outside the box, to ask the hard questions, and to make sure that we suck at it, because we will suck. Well, you will suck at it. I'm a master. To make sure that you suck at it. Yes.
Wrap up, please. Thank you.
And so we need to make sure that we all suck at it. And we can suck at it together, but we've got to start sucking at things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists. Dr. Bam.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the comments and the passion with which you spoke, and beyond the passion, the insight that you bring to the dialogue. I want to address the mom there, and I want to say, I'd like to chat to you afterwards. I have an MBA student that is currently working, it's the first one within our business school, looking at Asperger's syndrome and how employers make provision and opportunities for children on the autism spectrum. It's the first study of its kind. So there is, although it's not on your side of the equation in terms of the school, there's something that we're doing. We're looking into it to ensure more than just the bodily approach which you refer to. The person that spoke now, unfortunately I didn't get your name. Abongile. Yes, Abongile. I agree with you fully. I think in terms of business and this notion of business, and when you look in corporates, too often it's a medicalized approach. It's based on how it is that we fit a particular body into a space. And so yes, there's need for the language to change. And for myself, and I'm sure for all the panelists, we agree. It's society that creates these disabling environments. And so there's lots to be done from that side. And yeah, I think I'll allow some time to the next one. Advocate.
Thank you, Abongile. And perhaps thank you for your observation that you think the Human Rights Commission is not doing as much as you would want it to do in respect of, tackling cases of disability. But what I can say, I can only talk in terms of statistics that are there and public. The Human Rights Commission yearly deals with the total number of cases relating to inequality. It's about 45%. And of this 45%, complaints or issues that relates to disability matters, which the Human Rights Commission deals with, it's about 20%. So you can see that, perhaps much is not being said, or or a lot of cases, is not made public. But definitely, there are a lot of cases, if we just look at the statistics, which the Commission deals with regard to disability. And some of these cases, you know, just to give a picture, we have 9 provincial offices in the whole of South Africa. And each province has got an office of the Human Rights Commission that deals with all cases, including matters of disability, relating to disability. So I can assure you that in terms of the statistics, we are definitely doing our best with regard to matters relating to people with disabilities. Thank you.
I assume this is our concluding remarks. Indeed. Thank you. I think from my side, I want to just go back to what I spoke about earlier, and that's allyship. Can you imagine the power if every person here today and every person who's online just go to their local school and ask the question about disability inclusion in that school. Ask the question about an environment where all children are valued and are free and are welcome. And make it an issue. Can you imagine just that in itself already? Starting to say to people, I don't have to wait for a desperate parent to come knocking here and put up a fight. Parents of children in the school actually care. Parents of children in the school want their children to have that exposure. If all of us go back to our workplaces and we start asking, what are we doing to receive before the person arrives? In terms of addressing our own ableism, in terms of having those difficult conversations, in terms of understanding our own bias that we sit with. Can you imagine what we start rolling in our own spaces, your place of worship, your local shop, and again, speaking for all persons with disabilities in all intersectionalities. It's too easy to think of the white cane, the braille, the hearing aid, the sign language interpreter, the wheelchair. It's too easy to think about that. We need to think beyond that. It is more difficult because it requires that we have created that environment for people to have the freedom to open up and to speak up and to speak out. So really from an allyship, don't let it just stay a talk. We want action. Leave here today saying, this is how I feel after today. This is what I think after today. And this is what I will do after today. Thank you.
Thank you. Abongile, thank you for that. I really loved the passion with which you spoke. And I think it positively reinforced our strategy as an organization. As I mentioned earlier, that yes, our strategy that has in fact been recently approved by the board is that we engage young people at that age, at the level of learners. So I think it's an eye-opener. I think how you spoke in terms of just bringing children and young people at that level is something that we are absolutely we're absolutely on board in terms of that. And to the mom, I think also appreciate you drawing the spotlight on the spectrum, because yes, it's true. We are perhaps not engaging at that level, and you know how it can be challenging working with intellectual disabilities. And I think what you have done is you have just challenged me, challenged the organization to go back. And I love the fact that you gave examples, just even in terms of your packers, your you know, all sorts of, and it's nice to quantify these things because it makes our job easier as an advocacy, because we have to advocate employers to create these opportunities. So it helps when we know how to target these employers and what opportunities to target. Because when they come to us, they ask us, they seek our expertise in terms of how do we do this? How do we roll it out? How do we bring persons with disabilities? So it helps when we can have a targeted approach to even work with the spectrum as broad as it is. So I thank you for that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Can we give a big round of applause to our panelists, please? And a pat on the back for yourselves as well for paying attention and for participating actively. Thank you all so much. So I think my part is over. I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity, and it was a pleasure for me to interact with you all today. And I hope to do so again in the near future. At this stage, I'd like to hand over to Kamani, who will then lead us on to the next part. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I think we need another warm round of applause for our panel and our facilitator. We've now reached the end of our program as we know it. We're just going to invite the CEO of the NYDA to come and close off for us. But for our side, it's thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. We've prepared a light lunch for people downstairs. More than happy for you to join us. And just on your way out, we have a nice little shop here at the corner. You can go and see our beautiful stock that the comms team has prepared. It's not free, so you just have to pay.
Thanks, Program Director. It's nice to know. See, it's a difficult job, this one, because I must come after everybody has spoken so eloquently today. And then secondly, I'm the person who stands between you and lunch here. Yeah? So I can't necessarily be long. But I wanted to just reflect on a couple of things, because I think when you do closing remarks, it's important also to take everything we've heard today and reflect on a clear way forward. Yeah. So I wanted to first and foremost just express gratitude to the Nelson Mandela Foundation through the Chief Executive Selo Hatang for convening us and putting this dialogue together. You know, there were times in the NYDA's history where I don't think anybody wanted to be associated, especially not the Nelson Mandela Foundation, you know. And it's people like Selo and Lydia Pretorius who have allowed the NYDA to suck previously and to better at what we do and grow ourselves, you know, and to prove that where young people are given opportunity, they can lead better in society. I also want to thank the Executive Chairperson for eloquently locating the policy environment for disabilities in South Africa, particularly as it relates to young people. And then for all of the panelists for, I think, deep insights, as well as the questions from the floor that allowed us to elaborate on the things we know, but also the things we don't know. Yeah? And I thought there was an important question that we didn't get a chance to answer about what is actually the strategy, broader strategy, right? Today I think we focused on one piece of young people with disabilities, which is the gap between education and employment. But really how we see the strategy is in probably three different spectrums, right? And one is that government, or at least this government, sees, and I apologize if I use the incorrect language, but we see vulnerable and marginalized groups as things which cut across education and employment and social development, right? So in almost every portfolio, we expect young people and young people with disabilities and young women to be put at the forefront of those portfolios. Now, as the NYDA, we've crafted an integrated youth development strategy which is inclusive of young people living with disabilities. And our role, and I think a number of the panelists reflected on it, is that you have to drive accountability in the system, right? We have to get government where it has committed to saying it will do things, to make sure those commitments are met in a very public platform, right? And we have policies and we have strategies in South Africa. That is why we have taken the deliberate decision that every year we will publish government's actual progress on meeting commitments to young people, inclusive of young people with disabilities. Those reports are available on our website. You can check them out, and we'll continue to publish them until the end of the administration, because there has to be accountability, but equally there must be consequences for those who continue to fail to deliver on commitments to young people. Secondly, and I want to use a practical example of this, is that target setting is important, right? So it is important where we say 2% or we say 7% or we say any sort of percentage, right? But it is useless, in my experience, to set a target without creating the enabling environment for that target to succeed. Yeah? So you take Minister Motsaledi's project, right? And we were deeply involved in many of the youth employment and education projects, right? The only time that project will succeed is if you think, when you design, how you design inclusive of young people with disabilities. So when you think about design, is to say, when I recruit, am I inclusive of the recruitment of young people with disabilities in every single spectrum, whether it be blind or deaf or mental health or any other form of disability, right? When you place those young people, do they have the tools that they need to be able to succeed in the workplace? Yeah? But equally so, are they protected from workplace bullying or discrimination? Do they have the level of support so that they don't drop out of that program? In every single program that we design within youth employment, we are pushing for the design to be inclusive of young people. And I want to close off with how you make this being from theory into public policy, right? Is that 2 or so years ago, President Ramaphosa tasked us with revitalizing national youth service in South Africa, right? And service is at its core is the ability for a young person to do meaningful quality service in their community, to be able to earn an income for doing it, and to be able to gain skills and employability to be able to transition into the next phase of their lives. Believe it or not every young person wants to go directly into employment. Not every young person wants to go to university, right? And service is a transitional arrangement for many young people who find themselves outside traditional forms of pathways in the economy, right? And I remember the conversation I had with one of the president's advisors was to say, you know, what does the president want us to do in national youth service? And she said that if you leave it to the president, he'll want 50,000 young people marching down the street in military uniform, you know. So it's your job to go and find something that makes this program meaningful, right? And when we thought about it, I thought about the deep structural problems that South Africa faces, right? We have so much land, and yet we're food insecure, right? We lament about how in our public schools, you know, young people don't play sports. There's no arts and debate and culture and chess anymore. And I said youth service is an opportunity, or we said youth service is an opportunity for us to revitalize many of the forgotten about things, right? To use youth service not as an income transfer program, but to address many of the societal issues as a real socio-economic program of government, right? Now, I want to reflect on, and we did these things. In the design, we said that let us set a target for young people with disabilities. Let's be inclusive of the recruitment. Now, I've invited one of the organizations to be here today because we went to civil society. Civil society is the ones who are creating these meaningful opportunities for young people, right? And one of the organizations is Sports for Social Change, right? They were started off when Nike wanted to look at sports as a mechanism for change on the African continent and across the world, yeah? And I think it's relevant because Madiba himself believed in sports as a uniting factor and as a nation-building and social cohesion program, right? And in the Sports for Social Change network, they recruit young people to be sports coaches, to be runners of recreational facilities, yeah? But what inspired me about what they're doing is that we asked organizations at a minimum to take 3,000 young people. For them, they're absorbing 4,000 young people for us. Out of those 4,000 young people, they didn't take 2% living with disabilities. They didn't take 7%. They asked for 80% of those young people to be young people who faced any sort of disability or special need. Yeah? And generally when I talk about this, I'm heavily overcome with emotion, right? Because it speaks to what I think we are trying to do here today, is to say, if we do the bare minimum, we will not get to where we need to be. Yeah? It takes organizations and business and government to say, we will treat everybody and we will go above and beyond the call of duty to achieve what we want to do for young people in this country. Yeah? And I think that for me is an example of how you can take public policy like this, right, and use it to craft meaningful, long-term, quality partnerships. Yeah? And I just wanted to cite that as an example of what is possible when we think outside of nominal, generic, very forms of thinking. So thank you very much, colleagues. I hope I have not gone past my 5 minutes, but thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful lunch and travel safe home.
All right, thanks, CEO of the NYDA. I think we have a mouthful for today, and there's a long road ahead, but I think we've taken the initial steps towards that road. So just to thank you again and to alert you that we have lunch downstairs that's been prepared, and we have a shop on your way out. Just pass by there. I'm sure we have enough T-shirts, shorts, caps, and everything for everyone.
Thanks to you. You've been such a sterling job.
Tried our best.
Yeah,
I think the important thing is what happens after class that we're looking for.
Hi, how are you? Petule.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks, and you?
Petule, no idea.
Nice to meet you. I'm Lubesi. Ah, we meet?
We meet on the finally.
I feel like I've known you all my life.
It's okay. We've been talking
Yes,
there.
I'm so glad to finally.
Yeah, now you put a face.
Finally.
Yeah. How are you? I'm good. And you? I know we said we'd catch up, but this one looks like.
I think what we need to do is have things to teach you. Particularly if you would want it to be
Perhaps maybe as well suggested, maybe let's look at a date, maybe the next coming 2 weeks. Yeah, maybe it's an opportunity for you to come to our office if you're not far.
Let's do it like that.
Yeah, just in the beginning, I'm sure you've seen it.
It's a chance for us to get out. We love our office.
To get out.
When you come to the office,
yeah.
What we do is attending the conference.
No, that's fine. We can communicate from Monday. Just communicate from Monday. Yeah. Okay, so much. Thank you. Thank you for the work. Thank you for the work. Without you, we don't do it. Yeah. No, you also, it's a partnership, so we need to communicate. But it's good to see the work come out and people are talking about physical things. Yeah. So the duty we have now from our side is to find a report. Yeah. The future will share. We'll share and then we'll talk about it. Yeah. But from Monday we can communicate. But thanks, my brother. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Well done. You did a great job. You did a great job.
I'm really happy with and I love how you managed to filter in shameless shop marketing.
I'm trying to keep. Let's shop us generic money so we can keep our jobs.
Honestly, when I read it, I saw those journals in the shop and I was like, oh, they can't come. Yes, I beautiful those journals. The journals that he was writing wasn't the ones he was writing letters to Mum when he had his family journey. Oh, the books. Oh, I was more excited about the pictures that he was writing.
Are they being sold?